chronic loneliness has very profound negative effects on a human life. The studies, the science, the data, everything is there that shows us that people who are chronically lonely do have higher rates of dementia. They have lower quality of life. They die earlier. So all of this is there that tells us that it is something that's bad for you. But what we have to understand is that loneliness is an emotion. It's a state of existence more than anything else. You can be surrounded by 100, by 1,000 people, but you can still feel lonely, right? You can feel like you have no meaningful relationship. You have no connection. Nobody understands you. You can be lonely in a sea of people, and so that's the reality of loneliness. So that kind of chronic loneliness is bad for you. That is a curse. Yet at the same time, there was actually just a study released just yesterday. It was published yesterday. So this is like hot off the press, brand new stuff. They actually did a study on the brains of people who suffer from loneliness. And yes, the negative effects are there, but then they actually found some positive effects as well. They found that certain areas of the brains of people who stay alone, they're actually larger and more developed than people who are not lonely. Those are the areas of the brain that correspond to imagination, that correspond to creativity, that correspond to planning for the future. And so there is kind of a silver lining to the cloud of loneliness as well. And so what we kind of have to realize is that if we can isolate that silver lining, then that can actually have a profound effect on personal growth. And this is what we find as well when we look at the lives of so many successful people throughout history, is that they utilize not the chronic feeling of loneliness, but the habit of taking time out, taking periods of time and for being alone, for periods of time of solitude. And when they took those periods of times of aloneness or solitude, that resulted in amazing spurts of personal spiritual growth, in both religious as well as the secular realms. We have people in the religious realms like Moses and Buddha and Jesus, peace be upon all of them. They spent large periods of their time, of their lives, in solitude, meditating, praying, worshiping. Buddha, peace be upon him, spent years meditating under the Bodhi tree before he reached what we call nirvana, what we call enlightenment. Right? Then he started preaching this to people. We look at the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the founder of Islam. He spent days, weeks, months on end alone in Cave Hira. People could say he was lonely, but he was taking that time for solitude, for reflection, for prayer, for worship. Then he attained prophethood. The founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian, peace be upon him, as well spent months on end alone in a room praying, worshiping, self-reflecting. And then he came out with amazing prophecies and news of the unseen with that spiritual growth. Even in the secular realm, you have people like Steve Jobs who attained immense success in whatever it is he was achieving. And he actually credits a lot of his success, a lot of the ideas and the concepts behind the designs and the products he came up with towards periods of meditation and being alone. People like immensely successful comedian of our time, Jerry Seinfeld. He credits a lot of his success, as comedic genius, to being alone and meditating. And so we find that this is what Islam advocates for. In short, I'll wrap up my comments. Islam advocates for not cutting yourself off from society and living in the jungle, but living in society, being a social animal, but finding time alone to meditate, to pray, to worship, to connect with the divine, to connect with something deeper. And that leads to that personal growth that we find in all of these people.